Carl. Thank you. Thanks to 5 Point. Thanks, Judy. Hi, Judy. I just wanted to, first I'm going to just ask Joe a little bit about the origins of the exhibition, how it came about, selection of artists, theme, content, etc. So.
Thank you, Mel. Hera reached out with the initial Strange Names 3-person exhibit concept years ago. Our names present an obstacle for some, the challenge of pronunciation, or even the reluctance to even give it a try. It's a reflection of the American attitude. You assimilate to us, but we don't have to assimilate to you. Life and logistics got in the way, and the idea went on the back burner. I recently revisited the idea and desire to have it coincide with the current political climate. It's not necessarily a protest. The exhibition is more of a reflection of what's happening. I believe the show is definitely something different for the gallery, but I'm grateful for the platform and the opportunity. I hope people get to check it out while it's still on view.
Great, thank you, Joe. I appreciate that. So basically, for those of you who have not been to the gallery, we're lucky enough to be able to share some images with you tonight. And very briefly, the format of tonight's talk will, we're basically going to ask each artist to share thoughts on selections from the exhibition for about 10 minutes. I will keep things moving along. Carl's going to show some slides to correspond to the artist's works. And we do ask that if you can keep your questions until the end of the talk, after all 3 artists have shared their work with us, we'll do a Q&A, and I think there's a Q&A button down here. And we'll probably have about 15 minutes or more for the Q&A portion of this evening's talk. So again, thanks everybody, and I'd like to invite Hiro to share some thoughts about your work in the show with us.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you everybody to join us. This is great. So we have a limited time, so I'm gonna be quick, hopefully. So the first, I'd like to talk about the neon and table piece. I forgot the title, but this is sort of like last probably 1 year of my practice. It's very simple practice of everyday life, look into the everyday life and then see what I can find. And then what kind of experience I get. So the table itself is just a table. Not any, it's a specific table. And then the lights and then lace is the one of the key. When I look at my window every day, the one of the window doesn't have a light, only fall. Between September to October, the sunlight comes in certain times. So that light is not usual light to me, because the other side of the window there is a bushes, and that bushes, the lights was sort of like come through the somehow avoiding those leaves and then trees, and then come into my window. And then leaves is always kind of moving. So the light is always moving. So I've been looking at this more than almost 20 years in this window, but I noticed this probably 16 years ago, but I never really pay attention to long time. Then this year, well, technically last year I had the very heavy surgery, and I'm stuck in a house. Well, so in this, that means I have stuck in the house technically for 2 years now because of the COVID. After the, like a surgery is done, and it's like a recovering, and then the COVID came. So I'm stuck in this year again. So it's kind of funny. So I really kind of wanted to do something, but I don't really know how, because it's a light coming through the window. It's nothing really else. So then I slowly start realizing I have lots of neon light, and then it's easy to get the lace in the fabric. So I got it together, and then I tried completely different things, and then several, like a trial, then ended up like that, and then it's like a 11 neon lights put it together right next to each other. It's a start kind of blinking, and then I thought that was amazing because that's what I wanted to, but I never expected it. So that's the how it comes to, like at this show. This is also kind of related to the photograph of the wind chime, Japanese wind chime. So that's kind of like a between my investigation of, well, not investigation, it's more meditation of the moment. So the wind chime is one moment, the things that touch on the little bell, and then little bell kind of like resonated for a while. So I took a photograph, and then that photograph, usually we think about it only one moment, but it's not the moment. Moment is not really true, it's a duration. So that kind of things is, like I'm thinking about. So that's why those two pieces is coming. And then the probably one other piece I want to talk about is equation. I call the equation. It's because I feel like what equation means quite different meanings in there. So yes, I did this big surgery last year, and then that was a fail. I almost died. And then, of course, luckily, I was not completely knocked out for 2-3 days. So basically, I don't even know when I was almost dead or like alive. Only I know is, like a nurse was waking me up. Okay, I wake, and then I never know I was almost dead. So anyway, at a time, I lost a lot of blood. So my blood is Japanese blood, but I lost. So the doctors put another blood, American blood, most likely. I don't even know, either white people or black people, maybe mixture, or any kind of all kind of Americans' blood is now in my vein. So I thought I have to make this something like about this. So that's why I made this glass paddle, which is I lost, but I still alive means, like all my loss was compensated by infusion, which is all American people's blood. So I thought that was a really, really interesting thing. So I kind of like it's kind of weird things because everything was happening while I'm sleeping. And while when I wake up, my blood is somebody else's, filled with somebody else's blood. So, and then that's made me alive. So this is a kind of one of the answer towards the strange name, which is very alienated experience. But at the same times, it's we never know what happens next moment. And then now it's really kind of like a strange timing to get, having, this show. I kind of like visioned this show is like almost 4 years ago. And, 3 years ago, 3 years after that, my blood, I don't know how much, but, mixed with totally, this country's people's blood. So that's really strange experience. So I guess that's all I need to talk about it today. And then probably, I can answer something Q&A question session. So, all right, Mel?
Thanks, Hiro. I really appreciate listening to you talk about the work firsthand. It's quite a powerful show. On that note, I would like to introduce Olu Oguibe and have Olu share his remarks about some select images that are in the show.
Right, and so I have 3 works in the exhibition. This year I've been making a body of new work with support of an Open Society Foundation Fellowship. And the new work is focused on the plight of people in different parts of the world who, for all sorts of reasons, are compelled to leave or flee their homes or places of birth to seek refuge or prospects of a better life in some other place or country. In essence, the new body of work extends the work that I made in 2017 for Documenta 14. And the 3 works in this show are part of this ongoing project. And the first work, which I'd like Carl to get up on the screen, is called Lost at Sea. It's the work with the wall text, if we could get it up on the screen. It's really just a simple wall text. And the second work is called Shoes, after trying all sorts of other titles that seemed to rather hamstring the work. And the third work, which is an LED light sculpture, is self-titled. It says, "I was born here." And so Carl, are you there? Because I can't see the works. I'd like to look at them while I'm talking about them.
Yeah, it should be screen shared.
Can you see them? Can you see the work? Hello, folks. Can you all see the work on the screen?
I cannot.
Okay. At any rate, I'll go ahead and talk about them. But I do need for us to see the work, because I need to talk about them while people are looking at them. So the final work, there we are. All right, so the LED sculpture is self-titled. It says, "I was born here." Now, if we go back briefly to the first work, the wall text, it's an original text which I wrote with all manner of subjects and protagonists in mind, from ancient times to the present, but also more specifically, as the title Lost at Sea indicates, with the thousands of people who perish in the Mediterranean Sea each year trying to get from Africa to Europe, or out on the open seas trying to get from the Middle East to Australia, or even just across the British Channel, trying to get from Dover on one side to the UK on the other side. And only a few days ago, in fact, 140 of those poor souls drowned in the Atlantic Ocean when their overcrowded boat capsized as they try to get from Senegal to the Canary Islands. And they're only a small fraction of the thousands who meet that sad fate each year. Now, however, if you take a moment to read that text, and I'd actually like for that to be highlighted, if that's possible, Carl, for wall text. If you actually read that text, you might find that it probably speaks or speaks to or describes your own parents or grandparents or great-grandparents' story as well, except that they survived their journey and found home in another country where through trial and tribulation, they eventually settled down and established a new life and community, if they were lucky. Now, in the two other works, I've tried to invoke that journey and the dreams and aspirations, the hope of finding refuge or a kindly welcome of opportunity and acceptance, if not for them, then at least for their children. And I thought of the saying made popular by Maya Angelou, that all God's children need traveling shoes. So you think about what is wrapped in those traveling shoes, what is carried in the mud and dust that cake those shoes as someone tries to get from war-torn Syria into Turkey, and then from Turkey into Greece, and then into Germany, or as a family traverses the desert on the Mexican border with little food or water, and sometimes vigilante dogs are hounding their trail. Now, the third work, which is the LED sculpture, speaks to the experience of subsequent generations after those people have settled in a new place or country, and how those communities, their children and grandchildren, are today permanently kept on the outside of society in many places for no other reason than that their parents or grandparents or even great-grandparents came from elsewhere. People like my young nieces and nephews in Maryland and Kentucky, or your own children, who, like millions of others, would one day have to defend the fact that they were born and raised here, that they are Americans or Germans or English or French, that they're not immigrants, but natives, that they're not from Turkey or Japan or Syria or Mexico or Somalia or Nigeria, that here is where they actually come from. One thing you might notice so far, that I've actually used the term immigrants only once. I like to talk about that very briefly. In the course of the many years that I've dealt with these issues through my work or my writings, I've come to believe that the term immigrants is deliberately instrumentalized to further entrench the problem. On one hand, certain communities are made to wear this permanent armband that says immigrants, which is meant to imply outsider, not one of us. And that's you and your children and your children's children, even if they were born here, even if by definition, they're native citizens just like everyone else. At the same time that you're made to wear this permanent tag that says you'll never be one of us, you're also told that you're the one who's at fault, that you're the one who refuses to integrate. You and your children are the problem with your smelly food and your religion and your strange cultures and your strange names. And before long, your children who were born and raised here, those children are told to go back where they came from. Meanwhile, they were born here. This is the only home they have ever known. They come from here, and this is their country of birth, their home. Someone like Joe, for instance, who's born here in America. So I've personally arrived at a place where I think that it's time we revisit how that word, immigrant, is used and misused, and how it's politicized and utilized to deliberately and permanently keep communities alienated and quarantined generation after generation. Now, imagine if we referred to everyone alike who, for whatever reason, has had to relocate from their home country to another country simply as expatriates. White or black, Asian, German, Mexican, Palestinian, Ghanaian, Japanese, whether they're refugees or asylum seekers or highly sought after essential workers, everyone expatriates, one and all. The term would become redundant, and the stigma that's currently and deliberately attached to that other word, immigrant, would not apply. Of course, I'm not naive enough to think that desperate determination to lock certain communities outside would disappear. But I think that all of us, at least those of us who consider ourselves progressive or humanist or more enlightened, whether we are curators or writers or artists or advocates or scholars and teachers, I think we could all contribute significantly if we didn't join in constantly tagging people as immigrants with all the social repercussions and attitudes that are entrenched and baked into that term. And so these are some of the many issues that I've been grappling with in these works. And now, of course, with artists' talks like this one, there's always the danger that one then locks a work into a single, perhaps even simplistic, narrow band of interpretation where ultimately viewers are forced to see the work through the artist's explanations. And I don't intend that to be the case. And I'm hoping that the works have sufficient strength and presence, that they're able to speak to different viewers in different ways, individually, depending on what they bring to the work. So that's really about it. And I'll be glad to talk about any of the mentioned issues if we have questions from people in the audience. Thanks.
Thank you, Olu. We'll definitely, I'm sure, get some questions at the end of today's session. And I really appreciate your thoughtfulness and time. So Joe, we would like to hear from you on your work when you're ready. It looks like Carl's getting some images for us.
Yes. So I would like to start off with More Than Yellow, Carl. So in this image, what I was really trying to look for is, creating a new narrative. For the longest time, Asian Americans have always been dubbed the model minority, and that's a very dangerous label to have. It's the pressure of wanting to conform and assimilate for the sake of, flying under the radar. And with the advent of coronavirus, the pandemic, there was a renewed, increased discrimination against Asian and Asian Americans due to, the origins of the coronavirus being from China. So there was an increased discrimination, and there was more and more written, in media, newspapers, and articles, magazines about this increased discrimination against Asians. And this in this piece, what I did was I chose an article from the New York Times about artists, specifically Asian American illustrators, and how they were coping and managing and experiencing this this new hostile environment stemming from the anti-Asian sentiment, derived from the origins of the virus. So I want to use that as a backdrop because it was current, and these are current reflections and experiences, first-hand experiences of these artists. But so using that as the backdrop, I was really fixated and really obsessed with these two derogatory terms that have been used to label Asian Americans. One being a Twinkie, and the other being a banana. Those two objects are yellow on the exterior, but white on the interior, and that's supposed to allude to the model minority that I spoke about earlier. So, imposing that text in bright yellow on this backdrop of the current events and increased discrimination, to me, it's taking a new narrative in a new hostile environment and taking these old derogatory, outdated terminology and bringing it to the forefront so we can discuss how archaic and trivial it really is to dub and create these silly, comical, derogatory terms. And we should be more focused on understanding that even within the Asian American community, Asian American itself is such a generic umbrella, and it negates the individual, complexities and struggles of Malaysian Americans, Chinese Americans, Vietnamese Americans, Burmese Americans. So, it's a great way, easy way of consolidating and creating a false facade of unity. But we need to, as an Asian American community, to really, give the platform and amplify the voices of the individual specific, Asian Americans. Because, even within the current Black Lives Matter movement, you have to also consider the Black trans life matters. You have to consider, the Black queer community, and we have to find every possible way to include all these different demographics, and we can't fall into the trap of, overgeneralizing, over simplifying the struggles. And so this piece was a mirrored piece. You have the actual, imposed text on the newsprint on the wall, but then you have the stencil that I use to paint the text on it on the floor. So the stencil itself is white, and the void and the outline is yellow. So it speaks on, the presence and absence of his influence and want to assimilate and not be confronted with the microaggressions or the actual bigotry that's happening towards Asian Americans. So that's a very loaded piece in itself. Carl, if we could then discuss the next piece, same difference. This was a very interesting term used growing up that I heard, same difference, because it was an oxymoron. How can it be different but the same? But the more I thought about it, and I wanted to find my own way of interpreting and finding meaning for that saying, and I finally found a way to display it physically, was through the object of these, mass-produced plastic-coated bike chains. Each chain has its own numerical combination. So each one has its own sense of security through these 4 digits. But if you set each lock to those codes, they can link together, and you can arbitrarily turn the knobs. So these 3 different disparate chain locks, despite having the ability to be completely different locked out, can be reset and come together as a unified chain, creating strength. So it's taking this simple idea of chains and locks, and the sub-name of the piece was Diplomats and Ambassadors. It's a straightforward representation of how, though you have different platforms and different, perspectives, there's ways to, level and find common ground. And having that connected in a semicircle or in a perfect circle, and represents that, continuity and willingness to progress and creating a united front. Carl, if we can discuss the next piece, I would like to, talk about business or pleasure. I spent much of my life living in Hartford, and living in very weird living spaces, whether it's small apartments or vaulted ceiling attic apartments. And it would require, creating a sense of home through modular furniture. And the only place that outlet would have modular furniture would be IKEA. And IKEA happens to be New Haven. So here I am trying to furnish a home in Hartford, traveling to New Haven to purchase products predominantly outsourced from China from a brand based in Sweden. There's a global exchange of, geography between, the Hartford geography, the New Haven geography, the journey of where the fabricated manufactured products came from, and the overall brand of IKEA. So this piece, it talks about travel. And I don't know if you can have dealt with this experience, but often, at the airports and airlines, they would ask why you were here, whether it's for business and pleasure. So taking this, this whole process of trying to establish a sense of home and comfort, go harking back to the show, Strange Names, and the sense of being immigrants and being fished out of the water. This piece, it seems like straight out of the catalog, but to me, it's such a strong, impactful reminder of, in my situation, in this construct and limited, resources, IKEA and the locations I would travel and the transit to obtain objects to make, me feel comfortable, come together to create this global conversation. And, I see that complex global conversation through the reusable IKEA bags that people often use even for other shopping trips. And then having the IKEA source hanging branch once again further, promotes the idea that these objects, under the Swedish umbrella are actually sourced from all over the world. And so it's really interesting how all these journeys, they come towards a trajectory, converge on a situation of me wanting to create the idea of home. And, during this political climate, even though I call this my home, there's a lot of people out there claiming that this is not my home. And that's a really scary conversation to be had. And I know many people out there in the world, in this nation, are also experiencing that. So yeah, that's how I really think together the show really allowed us to elevate everyday objects and images to bring forth these difficult conversations. Back to you, Mel.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you so much. I just wanted to take a quick moment to let everyone know that the exhibition is on view through November 14th. And there are 19 works by all three artists, again, on view through November 14th. We have 25 minutes or so for some questions. And I think it would be best, perhaps, if we use the Q&A tab below. Any questions out there for our artists? Oh, here we go. Hang on. Takes a sec. Okay, here we go. From Anthony Carr, I would like Olu to talk a bit more about the show piece.
Shoe piece.
Shoe says show, of course, yes. Olu, we can't hear you.
Right. You can hear me now, right?
Thanks, yeah.
Okay. So I was actually asking if Carl is still there, because it would be useful to
nice.
have the work up on the screen while talking about it. What can I say? Carl, can you have like a big one? Yeah, like make it full screen, because the tiny images are just really not good. Okay, so what would Anthony like me to talk about? I mean, the objects that I bought and somewhat transformed, and it's actually one of the pieces that made me. I mean, it gave me a lot of. It was a very challenging piece in terms of giving it a title. And at some point I had it as untitled. And I thought about things like, I thought about dreamers' shoes or pilgrims' shoes, and so on and so forth, with references to all sorts of different categories of people who've had to move from one place to another. And the interesting thing, of course, is that the other thing that I forgot to mention during my introduction is that this is actually the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the pilgrims from Europe to New England. So it's been commemorated very quietly, because of course it's very sensitive politically, but it's a historical landmark, and the story of the American nation, this event 400 years ago, and how when those people set out in Europe for the Americas, I think there was a mixture of expectation and uncertainty, ignorance even, but a lot of hope as well, and of course lots and lots of faith. But I think there was also something particularly European about their journey, which is that there was a sense of entitlement to this new land, this Zion, Canaan, that they were going to move to. And if you remember, there's actually a place in Connecticut here that's called New Canaan. And you'd find those kinds of names across the United States. If you know a little bit about the Bible, of course, Canaan is the promised land for the children of God. So there's a sense that we're going to move to this place, and we will hopefully find a place, and it's a place that God has destined for us to make a new home. Except, of course, that there were people living there already, and which is a reverse. If you think about today, and when people are forced or compelled to leave home or to flee home or to escape, to try to find refuge elsewhere, to seek asylum and so on and so forth, they do not go with a sense of entitlement. They do not go with a sense a destined place that someone has reserved for them. And they do not come to fight. They do not come to conquer. So that's very different. I think they just leave with dreams of what is possible in some other place where they hope to be welcomed, and for people to allow them the opportunity to recover their lives and build a new home. And I think that's what's built into what euphemistically is usually called the American dream. I think these shoes with the stars and stripes actually speak to those American dreams. And I can imagine some young person coming from across the border with the parents moving to the United States. I can imagine this encapsulating the essence of what is possible in the United States. And it doesn't always turn out that way, of course. So that's part of what I had in mind when I made this. But I also know that this is a pair of shoes that would speak to someone who is a far-right ultra-patriot, who would see this as also the encapsulation of their own sense of entitlement to the place, to the exclusion of others. So that's what I actually like about the work, is that it has all these different possibilities, and I prefer to just let it be. That's why I just called it shoes, rather than dreamers' shoes or pilgrims' shoes or whatever. I just called it shoes so that it would speak to different kind of people in different ways. I hope that answers Anthony's question.
Thank you, Olu. I have a two-part question for all of you from Susan Shutan. One, who are some of your influences? And second part of the question, or additional question from Suze, is how important is it that your work be understood by the lay public? Have any of you used your work as a jumping off piece for community dialogue outside of the art world?
I would like to speak on that. The layman is very entrenched and engaged with commodities, and a lot of the times the objects we use in these hard to understand conceptual works are things you use every day. So you have a familiarity, and a lot more about the pieces than you would like to admit, because what happens is, in putting in the context of a gallery, forces you from the beginning to assess this object as more than what you usually know about it. So it forces you to tap into some sort of investigative, imaginative part of your analytical side. So yes, I think every layman would understand this piece as objects, but because in that context of gallery, I also hope that it will force them to think beyond their usual context.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to that as well, and actually answer in the affirmative that because I make public work as well, many of my works also speak to the public or have conversations around them. And I think, perhaps the most exemplary would be my work for Documenta, which resulted in several months of controversy with demonstrations and forums and talks, and, political pushback and so on that galvanized the different political sections and civic organizations and so on in Kassel and in Germany. So yes, I think all of the work, in fact, can speak to whatever a lay person means. And I think that we intentionally set out to use the materials, just like Joe said, so that the objects themselves can also have a conversation with people without our intervention. And that's why it's important for me that I don't specify exactly what I mean in the work. Sometimes we do that with titles, and sometimes I just prefer to say untitled, so that people have the liberty and freedom to interact with the work, rather than be boxed into a certain place of reading or interpretation. But sometimes you also want the work to speak specifically, and then you can make the work more explicit in that sense.
Well, okay. I'm kind of not so good at presenting straightforward political things, or even some other genders. Olu and Joe does very well. I kind of tend to more my own experience, and then somehow I want to peel out something common between me and somebody else. But of course, often our expression in a sculpture is not really enough. Enough means if it's enough, no one really care. If it's too less, then no one could understand. So it's always some sort of balance between, but I tended to hide it behind. So that's why, like, you know, my case, I want to make something by hand. That's another thing. So I kind of go too much towards that way. Like, I really kind of like appreciate working with Olu and Joe. Is way they work is quite different from me, and then I kind of like learning from them. So that's because I don't have such a kind of like a way of kind of expressing things on seeing things in a certain object. So, but that's the so how like a sort of balance between tension between something concealed and something revealed. That's kind of like what I wanted to go for it. So.
Thanks, Hiro. There are a lot of great questions. I'm going to share M. Gabriella's question for Joe. If you could talk, the question is talk about the piece with the rice, which I believe is the difference between medicine and poison is the dose.
Yeah, it's a retractable barrier. It says "Do not enter, danger," and beyond the barrier is a zinc enamel tray that's very commonly found in Thailand. My parents are Cambodian refugees, but part of their refugee experience, they had to assimilate to the Thai culture in the Thai camps. So the rice beyond the retractable barrier, it's to represent the struggle and the trauma of the genocide and the Khmer Rouge, and the arrival of and the journey of my parents and family from Cambodia through Thailand to the Philippines and then eventually to America. So what you see beyond, in front, to the left of the retractable barrier tape is a shuttlecock, which is a common game, very forefather to hacky sack, and it's very commonly played in Southeast Asian countries. And it's a way to come together and create connections and bonds, and through a civil but yet fun, jovial manner. So that in itself is mounted very precariously on the mount of the barrier. And in front of that, on top of traditional Cambodian scars, kroma scars, is a box of Uncle Ben's rice. And right now, with what's going on in our political climate, society, you see corporate America, you see society trying to, through actions, show solidarity. And one of those actions, whether it be cosmetic, performative, or impactful and honest, is to remove these icons and images that represent a time of racism and slavery and just prejudice. So the distinctions, the separations of these two traumas and experiences is it's shown through the relationship of the barrier and the boxes of rice. You have a huge sack of rice that was farmed from Southeast Asia versus this nicely packaged whitewashed rigid construct of a box of rice that's been processed and machined with an image of a black man to sell in a predominantly Caucasian-run economy. So it's like showing a dichotomy of worlds and the ongoing traumatic events. And so that's the title, which is from a song by the band Circus Survive. The difference between medicine, poison is a dose, and racism and bigotry and all these sorts of evils are taught and learned, and what it's just a conversation of fighting a common ground.
It's great, Joe. Thank you so much for sharing that piece of work with us. We have a great question from Ricardo Riaz, who has, it's really for all of you. So what comes to mind, having listened to you all, is Mikhail Bakhtin, Russian thinker's notion of heteroglossia, variations within one language. All the artists have brought up different ways of narrating in specific words like immigration, banana, or blood, which bring up various stories and signification that expands the language and our knowledge of those types of narration and what those words mean. Has this year made you all confront these nuances in the language and manifest them in their works of art, or is this a constant struggle within your work?
Well, I think it's a constant struggle, but like this year's really kind of like in this country, there's two things. Well, the one is, COVID is not only this country, but entire globe was crisis with one little guys, proliferate all over the world. And the other one is this presidential elections. Those two things was, like a very, come to the very, I don't know how to describe. Well, it's a very nuanced, year. And we all has sort of like a big view, big picture. And then also we all had very individual experience. And then artists is always thinking or talking about individual experience connect to the larger view. So that's the probably, I don't know exactly I'm answering this, but one of the question, answer might be is, we are always like thinking about individual experience, but it's individual experience is always reflecting the actual things going on in society. So that's, I take that, I don't know this is answer or not, but that's the way I think about it.
I think Hiro has actually given an answer that could speak for all of us. I could point out that I've made work this year that's specifically about pandemic. The work that I exhibited a short while ago in Vienna, some of that were specifically about the pandemic. But yes, we deal with these issues in our work all the time. And the work that I have in this particular exhibition were already conceived for the Open Society Fellowship, Open Society Foundation Fellowship before the pandemic, although the pandemic itself then affected the fellowship. So yes, these are issues that we deal with all along in our works. But Hiro is very correct in saying that the manifestations and even just the scheduling of the show, these things have obviously been affected by the new challenges. I think there's a certain poignancy to the question of moving through borders as far as this year is concerned, and moving into next year with all the uncertainty as to what's going to happen now. What has happened with the Supreme Court, with what might happen next week, where do people stand in terms of having freedom to move across borders, or to even hope and have faith that they can move somewhere else and be accepted and have the opportunities to make a new life, create a new life for themselves and their families. We just don't know. So there's a great deal of anxiety. And I think that speaks to the work just as it does all the time.
I agree with, to build upon what Hiro and Olu have spoken of. This year, despite our practices and trajectories, constant struggle has always been something that permeates and exudes through the practice. But this year in itself has, really increased the level of anxiety. And for me, just moments ago, I was commenting on a Facebook friend's comment about depression and anxiety, and how fear is a huge component of an artistic practice. It's not only working towards success and resolution, but also working with the detriments and the handicaps and the worries and concerns. It's embrace those things that we often see as weaknesses, and this year, what often is considered as frailty and an inability to endure and manage has become a common strength building conversation. And more than ever, that we are more willing to be vulnerable, and that in itself is powerful. And I think this moment is an amazing time to perpetuate and expand on what we discuss about constant struggles, but do so in now a conversation that has more voices or more aware and or more willing to listen to about these specific issues. So I think this year has been a year where we are at our most raw as a world, and with that rawness, it comes truth. And as hippy-dippy as it sounds, it really exposes the essence of us all. So I think it's a weird time, but a beautiful time to be human and be imperfect.
Absolutely.
That's beautiful. Way to actually end a tough question, Joe. Thank you. I have been told that it's a wrap. So I wanted to thank everyone for participating, and it has been my great pleasure and honor to participate with you all. And again, I can't encourage everyone enough to go see Strange Names on View till the 14th. Carl?
Yeah, thank you all once again. Special thank you to our panelists, Joe, Olu, Hiro, and special thank you to Mel for organizing the event tonight. A reminder, as Mel said, Strange Names is on View through November 14th. Five Points Gallery is open Tuesdays and Thursdays 1 to 4, and Friday, Saturday, Sunday 1 to 5. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take
Thank
care,
you, Joe.
everyone. See you.